All right, strap in because Keir Starmer just got absolutely demolished on live television. And I'm not talking about a gentle political disagreement. I'm talking about a full-scale verbal annihilation. Nigel Gardiner, speaking from Washington, D.C., with the confidence of someone who's watched Donald Trump actually stop illegal immigration in its tracks, called the British Prime Minister absolutely useless. Not ineffective, not struggling, useless. That's the kind of word you use when something has literally zero value, when it's taking up space and providing nothing in return. But before we proceed, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more updates on the UK political insight. Thank you. And honestly, after channel crossings hit 50,000 under Starmer's watch and the White House is claiming zero illegal migrants for 3 months running, you can kind of see why Gardiner felt comfortable being that blunt. So stick around because we're diving into why Britain's immigration policy is being compared unfavorably to Trump's approach, why protesters wearing pink are being called Nazis, and why one guest accused another of taking lessons from Starmer on how to avoid answering questions. This is gonna be spicy. Let's start with the context because numbers don't lie, even when politicians do. Channel crossings have hit 50,000 since Keir Starmer became Prime Minister. 50,000 people have made the dangerous journey across the English Channel in small boats under Labour's leadership. That's not a small number. That's not a rounding error. That's a city's worth of people arriving illegally by boat. And before anyone jumps in with the usual defenses, yes, I know immigration is complicated. Yes, I know there are push and pull factors. Yes, I know people are fleeing war and poverty and persecution. But here's the thing. The British public was promised that Labour would get a grip on the situation. They were told Labour had a plan. They were assured things would improve. Instead, they've gotten worse, significantly worse. Now compare that to what's happening across the pond. The White House is claiming that for 3 months running, zero illegal migrants have made it into the United States. Zero. Now, whether you believe that number completely or think there might be some creative accounting going on, the broader point stands. Illegal immigration into the U.S. has dropped dramatically under Trump's second presidency. The caravans have stopped, the border crossings have plummeted. Whatever you think about Trump's methods, and trust me, there's plenty to debate there, the results are undeniable. He said he'd secure the border, and by every measurable metric, he has. That's why Nigel Gardiner felt so comfortable making the comparison. On one side of the Atlantic, you've got a leader who promised action and delivered it. On the other side, you've got Keir Starmer. Ben Leo asked Gardiner whether the UK could learn from Trump's success and whether British political leaders should bother asking Trump for advice. It's actually a fascinating question because it implies that our leaders might be too proud or too ideologically opposed to Trump to actually learn from what's working. And Gardiner's response was absolutely withering. He said he has zero faith in Keir Starmer. Not limited faith, not cautious optimism. Zero. That's the same number as illegal migrants entering the U.S., which I'm sure was not lost on Gardiner when he said it. He went on to say that Starmer has been absolutely useless at securing Britain's border and that things are actually worse under Labour. That's damning stuff, especially coming from someone speaking on international television representing a think tank perspective from Washington, D.C. The contrast Gardiner drew is really the heart of the issue. In the United States, Trump has implemented policies that, regardless of whether you agree with them morally or philosophically, have functionally reduced illegal immigration to nearly nothing. He's used a combination of deterrence, enforcement, international agreements, and frankly, reputation. People know that crossing into the U.S. illegally right now is going to result in immediate deportation. There's no long appeals process. There's no being released into the country while your case is heard. You get caught, you get sent back. It's harsh, it's controversial, but it's effective. Meanwhile, in Britain, people are still getting in boats in France, crossing one of the world's busiest shipping lanes, arriving on British beaches, and then entering a system where they'll likely remain in the country for years while their cases are processed. The comment section response that Gardiner's assessment could be shortened to simply "Starmer has been useless" is both funny and cutting. It's the kind of brutal simplification that politics sometimes deserves. But another commenter made an interesting point. They said it's a question of willingness, not ability. And that's actually quite insightful. Does Starmer lack the ability to stop small boat crossings, or does he lack the willingness to implement the kind of hardline policies that would actually work? Because let's be honest, we know how to stop small boats. You make it completely pointless to get in one. You make it clear that arriving illegally by boat guarantees immediate deportation with no exceptions. You process people offshore. You make bilateral deals with France to stop boats launching in the first place. These solutions exist. They're just politically unpalatable to large sections of labor's base. This is where ideology crashes into reality. Labor spent years attacking conservative immigration policies as cruel and inhumane. They criticized detention centers. They opposed the Rwanda scheme. They promised a more compassionate approach. And now they're in power and they're discovering what the conservatives already knew, which is that compassion without enforcement just means more people getting in boats. You can't have an immigration system that's both completely open and properly controlled. You have to choose. And Starmer seems to be trying to thread an impossible needle, wanting to appear tough while not actually implementing tough policies, and the result is the worst of both worlds: 50,000 crossings and a public that feels completely ignored. Then we get to the absolutely explosive exchange between Lizzie Cundy and Stephen Pound on GB News, which honestly deserves to be studied in political communication courses as an example of how not to defend your party's record. They were debating Britain's migrant crisis, and things got heated. Fast. Stephen Pound, defending Labour, claimed the government needs to be a bit more sensible and rational, and that the solution is processing people as quickly as possible. Now, on the surface, that sounds reasonable. Process people quickly, make decisions, either grant asylum or deport those who don't qualify. Simple, right? Except it completely misses the point. Lizzie Cundy was absolutely not having it. She accused Stephen of doing exactly what Keir Starmer does, which is not listening, not reading the room, and not answering the question. That's an absolutely brutal accusation because it's not just criticizing the policy, it's criticizing the entire approach to political discourse. She's essentially saying that Labour has developed a habit of talking past people's concerns, of answering questions nobody asked while ignoring the questions everybody's actually asking. And if you've watched Starmer at Prime Minister's Questions, you know exactly what she means. He has this maddening habit of pivoting to prepared talking points regardless of what he's actually been asked. But it was Lizzie's description of what's happening on the ground that really drove the point home. She talked about protests happening every day near her in Aldershot. She mentioned mothers who were scared for their children to go out. She described a hotel full of migrants and local people protesting peacefully, wearing pink of all things, which is about as non-threatening as you can get. And yet they're being called Nazis and far right. And she laid that directly at Keir Starmer's feet for using that kind of inflammatory language. This is where the government has completely lost the plot on this issue. You can't dismiss legitimate concerns about immigration and community cohesion as far-right extremism. You can't call mothers in pink Nazis. It's absurd, and it's politically suicidal. The use of the term Nazi to describe people protesting immigration policy is one of the most corrosive things happening in British political discourse right now. Nazi is not a synonym for person I disagree with. Nazis were responsible for the Holocaust. They murdered millions. They started a world war. They represented industrial-scale evil. Calling British mothers concerned about community safety Nazis doesn't just devalue the term, it actively prevents rational discussion of immigration policy. Because if everyone who wants controlled borders is a Nazi, then there's no space for legitimate debate. There's no room for reasonable people to express reasonable concerns. You've just divided the country into people who want completely open borders and Nazis. That's not politics, that's tribalism. Lizzie's point that the government is not looking after its own people is really the crux of the issue. Governments have responsibilities to multiple groups. They have responsibilities under international law to refugees. They have responsibilities to process asylum claims fairly. But they also have fundamental responsibilities to their own citizens, to keep them safe, to ensure community cohesion, to make sure public services aren't overwhelmed, to listen when people say they're concerned. And when you've got 50,000 illegal crossings and mothers too scared to let their children play outside, you're failing that basic responsibility. You can argue about why those mothers feel scared, you can debate whether their fears are proportionate, but you can't just dismiss them as far right and expect them to shut up and accept it. Stephen Pound's defense that we need to process people quickly is technically true, but practically useless. Yes, the backlog in the asylum system is a massive problem. Cases take years to resolve. People sit in hotels or detention centers in limbo. It's bad for everyone involved. But processing quickly doesn't stop people getting in boats in the first place. You could process every asylum claim in 24 hours and you'd still have boats crossing the channel because the processing speed isn't the incentive structure. The incentive is that if you make it to Britain, you get to stay while your claim is processed. And even if your claim is rejected, you might not get deported. That's what needs to change. Not the speed of processing, although that should improve too, but the fundamental incentive that makes people get in boats. The comparison to Trump's approach is uncomfortable for many people because Trump's methods are harsh. He's deporting people immediately. He's building walls. He's making deals with Mexico that essentially